A little boy, Carl Fredricksen, watched a tape of Charles Muntz's discovery. South America, paradise waters. No one would dare to set foot on this land but Charles Muntz. On his airship, the Wind of Adventure, he would overcome any obstacle. This transport had everything for the dogs, for the traveler refused to part with them. Charles brought back a monster skeleton from paradise waters, but scientists declared it a hoax. Muntz vowed to return to paradise waters and capture the beast alive. Charles was upset that Charles had been accused of tampering and was just running down the street wearing a pilot's helmet with a helium balloon in his hands. He stopped next to an abandoned building because he heard another kid yelling something about Charles Muntz from there as well. He quietly snuck inside this shack and saw a girl also wearing a pilot's helmet. Karl was very shy and couldn't even utter a word, while this girl hung a soda badge on his chest and told him that Karl was now in their club. The girl introduced herself as Ellie. They went to the attic to get Karl's balloon. The balloon is stuck on the other side and they have to go through a plank. The plank couldn't hold Karl and he fell, breaking his arm. Karl was lying at home, a cast on his arm, reading a book, when a helium balloon flew into the room and Ellie climbed in through the window to cheer him up. They built a kind of tent together out of blankets, where they sat together and watched Ellie's adventure book. Ellie talked about her dream of flying to paradise waters and building a cabin on the edge of a waterfall. They looked at a toy blimp together and Ellie asked to swear that Karl would take her on a blimp to paradise waters. Karl swore on his heart. She climbed out the window, saying he was quiet and they would definitely hit it off. Ellie and Karl grew up and got married. They bought the same abandoned cottage where they first met and started renovating it. They created Ellie's dream cottage that she had drawn as a child in her adventure book. They put 2 chairs by the window, one for Karl and one for Ellie. Karl was a helium balloon salesman and Ellie worked at the zoo. They were preparing for the birth of their baby and created a nursery, but Ellie had a miscarriage. Karl tried to support her and they started working on her adventure book again, raising money in the bank to fly to paradise waters someday. But there were constant setbacks: car repairs, Karl's broken leg. The jar had to be broken. The years went by and they grew old. They still dreamed of a house on the edge of a waterfall in paradise waters. Finally, Karl managed to get the tickets, but Ellie got sick. A helium balloon flew into her at the hospital while she was looking at her adventure book. Ellie died. Karl's gray routine began. He walked out onto the porch of his house. There is new construction going on all around, noise, dust. The builder's boss wants to buy Karl's house. Karl refuses as usual and says he will give it back only after his death. While Karl was watching TV, there was a knock on the door. There stood a little boy named Russell, who was a nature explorer. He had to help Karl in order to get one last senior citizen's assistance badge so that he could then become a senior nature explorer. To get rid of Russell, Karl made up as if he had lost Waffles' animal and asks him to find it. At that time, a construction worker's tractor drove by the house and hit the mailbox that Ellie was painting. Karl knocked the construction worker on the head with his cane in front of witnesses. The police arrived and Karl was summoned to court where they declared Karl a menace to the community. He had to leave the house and move to a retirement shelter. Karl read Ellie's adventure book and gained determination. The next morning, shelter workers arrived to pick Karl up. Karl asked to say goodbye to his home walls, but instead he released hundreds of helium balloons over the roof, which lifted his house to the sky. He was going to fly off to the waters of paradise. His cabin also had sails and a helm. He was going to fulfill his and Ellie's dream. He sat down on a chair near a window and relaxing as he heard a knock on the door. Karl thought he was imagining it, but the knock came again. It was Russell clinging to the porch. Russell went inside the house and started touching everything. He talked a lot. Karl couldn't stand it and turned off his hearing aid, cutting off strings of helium balloons. But then he turned it back on right away because Russell screamed because there were rain clouds right in front of them. The next day Russell and Karl were in South America, but they didn't realize it yet. Then the fog cleared and they see the same paradise waters. Karl and Russell decided to drag the house right up to the falls. Russell talked about how it might count as retirement assistance. The 3 dogs started chasing some bird, but they were driven away by a squeak from Karl's hearing aid. Russell complained that he was tired and he wanted to go big, but he happened to find footprints and started looking for that waffle animal. There was a rustling sound next to him while Russell was eating chocolate. Some birds started pecking at his chocolate bar. Russell went back to Karl and informed him that he had found waffle. Karl didn't pay attention to it, but when he turned around, he wondered what kind of tall creature it was. The bird began to play with Russell. Russell named him Kevin and asked to keep him, promising to keep an eye on him. Karl addressed the house as Ellie. Russell didn't understand why, but played along and asked Aunt Ellie to keep Kevin. Karl was still trying to chase Kevin away. As they passed the rocks, they heard some voice and saw the silhouette of a man. The voice said it smelled them. The silhouette of the man turned out to be rocks, but the voice turned out to be a dog. The dog said that his master was very smart, that he had created a collar that allowed him to talk. The dog's name is Duck. Duck also said that his master was looking for that bird that was coming with them, that is Kevin, and they need to take Kevin prisoner. Russell asked to take the dog with them because he was talking. Those 3 dogs, who were somehow distracted by the sound of Karl's hearing aid, were also looking for that bird. They all served the same master. Using a collar, the lead dog, Alpha, a dog with a funny high-pitched voice, recognized the location of Duck, who was with Karl. Karl tried to get rid of both Kevin and Duck. To get rid of Kevin, he threw a chocolate bar, and to get rid of the dog, he threw a tennis ball that was on the end of his cane. Even so, Duck brought the tennis ball back and continued to address Karl as master. Kevin brought it back, too. Russell tried to put up a tent, and then admitted that he had never put up a tent. Dad was always on business trips, and when Russell called Dad, Phyllis said that Russell was disturbing Dad. Dad promised to be at the Explorers Awards ceremony, and Russell had to get the last badge for that. Russell said Kevin had to be protected because Duck blurted out that he'd been ordered to take Kevin prisoner. Russell asked Karl to swear on his heart. The balloons were deflating little by little. Kevin climbed onto the roof of the house and started screaming. Duck said it was a bird echoing the children. Karl disappointed Russell that they couldn't take Kevin to the kids because there wasn't time. Kevin ran off while the 3 dogs showed up just as the 3 dogs arrived. Alpha starts to get mad at Duck because the bird ran away again. The dogs forcefully lead Karl and Russell to the base of the cliffs where there were many dogs. An old man was standing there. Karl recognized him as Charles Muntz. The dogs were told that Charles and Russell were not hostile people. They were invited to dinner aboard the Wind of Adventure. Karl is thrilled. Duck was given a cap of shame for losing a bird. Charles gives a tour aboard the Winds of Adventure. Alpha had his collar repaired and now had a menacing low voice. The dogs prepared dinner. Charles talked about how he had been looking for a bird his whole life. Charles realized that it was the same bird that Russell had found. Russell recognized Kevin in the skeleton and said so, adding that he had taught the bird to follow them by feeding it chocolate. Charles immediately ended the conversation by lying that Kevin was gone and had run away. Charles threatened Karl. Charles said they should leave. At the same second, a bird screamed Kevin was on the roof of the house. A pack of dogs immediately ran after the house. The chase caused many helium balloons to burst. Duck tried to stop the dogs, but he was unsuccessful. Karl rode on Kevin. They went over a cliff. Kevin hurt his paw. Russell asks to take Kevin home and Karl agrees. Karl and Duck are pulling a house together talking about wildlife. Russell told of his early childhood, where he and his father would buy ice cream and sit on the curb to eat it, counting blue and red cars. They led the bird to the maze where it was supposed to live. But the spotlights from the airship blazed above them. Charles grabbed Kevin and set Karl's house on fire. Charles barely put the cabin out. He snapped and started yelling, saying Duck is a bad dog and he doesn't want to go save Kevin. Russell, frustrated, goes after Karl. They finally reach the waterfall. The house landed on the ground. Russell took off his badges because he didn't want them anymore. Karl took the badges and went inside the house trying to put things in order, but everything was empty and gray. He started looking at the adventure book again. Karl looked at the pictures of his life with Ellie. On one of them she had left a caption thanking him for his adventures and advising him to look for new ones. At that time, Russell tied balloons to himself and flew to rescue Kevin. Karl started throwing all the furniture out of the house, including his and Ellie's chair. The house took off again. There was a knock on the door. It was Duck. Duck said he loved Karl because he was his master. Karl was pleased and called Duck a good dog. Russell flew to Charles's airship and snuck inside. Muntz caught Russell and tied him to a chair and opened the baggage compartment so Russell fell in. Charles rescued Russell and, without untying him, carried him into the cabin. Karl started to make his own way in after Kevin. The bird was being followed by the dogs. Karl removed a tennis ball from his cane and distracted the dogs while he himself tried to free Kevin. Russell pulled the ropes off of himself, fell and hung from the hose in the air. Charles with a cane started fighting against Charles with a saber. Duck was left alone with the dogs who did not like him. Duck put a cap of shame on Alpha and then the other dogs started to obey Duck. Charles was also fighting Charles. They had already climbed into the house with Kevin when Charles started firing off bullets. Kevin, Duck, and Russell were in the house that had almost fallen off the airship. As Charles held the house, Charles went inside, intending to kill Kevin. Charles ordered Russell to hold Duck and Kevin and then got the chocolate. Kevin jumped out the window of the house with Russell and Duck, and then the cabin, with Charles still inside, fell down with him. Russell replied that he felt sorry for the house. Charles smiled and said that it was just a house. Karl, Russell, and Duck took Kevin to their children and then returned home, flying the blimp. The award ceremony has begun. Russell was honored with a Senior Citizen Assistance badge. Karl hung up that badge and gave his most valuable one, Ellie's soda badge. Russell became a senior nature explorer. Russell and Karl sat on the curb eating ice cream, counting blue and red cars with Duck. Karl's cabin landed on the edge of the waterfall.